Hello all, and good day to you. This is Roger with Grubus Games Unlimited, creator of Dungeon Crusade, and I hope everyone out there is doing fantastic, staying safe, and is having an awesome week. In the prior video, we were going over the hero phase, which is the fourth phase of a churn. We'll now be going over the monster phase that follows directly after the hero phase. And as I've said earlier, once the monster phase is over, this concludes the current churn. And as always, thank you for your interest and time in checking out the game. We have a bunch of new subscribers here as of very recently, so we welcome you all. We're very happy that you're here, and we hope that you're enjoying everything that you're learning about Dungeon Crusade. And I wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone for all the nice comments in that update video from just a few days ago. You guys are indeed the best, and I'm incredibly grateful to you. So I will be getting in there to reply to many of your comments and hang out with you a bit on the conclusion of me getting this video uploaded to the channel and working on the Kickstarter monthly update. This monster phase video was quite the beast to put together, but I think you're really going to enjoy this one and see some game mechanics that you've never quite seen before, so I hope that you enjoy all of this. And like I mentioned in that update video, the Pledge Manager will be closing down as of Monday, April 27th at 11:59 p.m. There is a link for you to the Dungeon Crusade Pledge Manager in the description section of this video if you would like to see the 3 editions of Dungeon Crusade available and a few add-ons being offered at this time. And I wanted to sneak this in here. These are affliction cards, and your heroes can get afflictions from monsters and creatures in the game and some other things. So further along in the Spotlight series, we're going to be going over afflictions. And before we get going with the monster phase video, I just wanted to point something out. All monsters are versed in 3 of the 6 warfare types. So we can see, I was just pointing out, that's a Fallen King. He is versed in Arcane Warfare. We're going to put that over on Phase 1. He is versed in Spiritual Warfare. We're going to put that in Phase 2. And finally, the Fallen King is versed in Chaos Warfare. So before the battles, you always shuffle those up. I didn't shuffle them that good. And then you flip them over, and that reveals the order of the battle, or of the upcoming battle. We'll be touching more on this later in the Spotlight series, but I just thought I'd throw this in here. And of course you use the colored dice for each of the warfare types. In the monster phase, it is now time for all of the monsters and creatures that are within the hallways and corridors of the dungeon to take their turn. As we touched on in the introduction video, the monsters and creatures will be using the patrol route system to traverse throughout the dungeon. With this unique and exclusive game mechanic, it gives the monsters and creatures unpredictable movement patterns that will always keep your heroes on their toes and may have you rethinking some of your strategy and planning, as you will never know where they are going to move to next. In a nutshell, the patrol route system creates a living dungeon experience for the player. At the start of the monster phase, the first thing you will do is consult the Minion Population track. This track will inform the player of how many minions should be in the dungeon at the start of the monster phase. When selecting a scenario, you can choose from one of the 6 difficulties listed in the scenario book. Or feel free to set the minion population to any value you like. Maybe you would like to have an easier game with only 3 minions populating the dungeon. Or if you would like a longer and more difficult game, you can set the population to 16 minions. Prepare for total crusade chaos. In this example, we can see the minion population track is set at 6. However, looking over the dungeon, we can see it is only populated with 5 minions. So what we have to do is spawn in a minion so we have 6 minions within the dungeon. When you spawn a minion into the dungeon, you'll be using the same method as you did when spawning in a guardian. So let's go over this. First, we'll draw a minion monster card from the appropriate deck. The heroes are currently working on quests for quest table 1, so we'll draw a minion monster card from the level 1 deck. We can see it's a Red Wraith Elite, so we need to find its miniature, then roll the d8 to see what spawn location the Wraith will spawn in at in the dungeon. We can see the result is 3 on the d8, so we will spawn the Wraith in at spawn point 3 in the dungeon. After the minion is placed in the dungeon, you will place its monster card in the monster area. You will be placing it at the very end of the monster cards that reside in this area, since it was the last monster spawned into the dungeon. Now that the minion population has been met, it is now time for the monsters to activate, starting with the very first monster in the monster area. Looking at the green race monster card, we can see it has a base movement of 3 plus the roll of 1d6 to generate its movement. At this time, we will be rolling 1d6, the raid die, and the patrol route die, since it is on a spawn point. Before we go any further, let me explain to you what the raid die is and the difference between vagrant minions and raiding minions. When a minion spawns into the dungeon, they are known as vagrant minions. These minions traverse throughout the hallways and corridors of the dungeon on the various patrol routes, unaware of the hero's presence. However, there is always a possibility that a vagrant minion will convert into a raiding minion, which they will then follow the bloody arrows painted on the dungeon floor to escape the dungeon, raid the village, thus raising the terror level by 1. If the terror level ever reaches defeated, the village is overrun and the heroes have failed in their mission to save the village. The game immediately ends. Let's take a look at the raid game mechanic and see how a vagrant minion can possibly convert into a raiding minion. Before the game begins, during setup, a player must set the raid difficulty. Notice here in the scenario book that there is an entry for the raid difficulty with 6 different difficulty options. It goes from novice, easy, normal, hard, expert, then finally master. Also, notice the different values here. That corresponds to the particular die you'll be rolling for the raid die. If the highest value for that raid die is rolled, the vagrant minion will then convert into a raiding minion. Let's take a look at the raid difficulty panel. This is located on the Dungeon UI board. This is used to keep track of the raid difficulty for your game session. For this particular demo we're doing, We have the raid difficulty set at normal, which means we'll be rolling the D10 for the raid die. So during this game session, anytime a vagrant minion would roll the raid die, and on a result of 10, it will convert into a raiding minion. If this occurs, a player will immediately place a raid token on that minion's monster card as a reminder that it is now a raiding minion. As a side note, always remember that if a hero at any time during the game comes within a 4-square radius of a vagrant minion and there is clear line of sight, it will immediately convert into a raiding minion, no matter what phase it is in the game. Lastly, if a hero ever makes a ranged attack on a vagrant minion with a special ability or any type of special ability that targets a vagrant minion, it will convert into a raiding minion, regardless if the hero landed a hit or missed. So looking at the monster area, we can see the first monster to activate is the Green Wraith. We would gather the D6 to generate its movement, the raid die, which is the D10 for this example, and finally the patrol route die to see what patrol route the Wraith will be traveling on. Let's roll the dice and see what happens. We would first consult the raid die. We can see the result is 8, so this minion will continue as a vagrant minion. We would then consult the D6 for its movement. The result is a 6. Looking at the Wraith's monster card, we can see it has a base movement of 3. By adding the result of the D6 to the Wraith's base movement, it has generated 9 movement for this turn. Finally, let's take a look at the patrol route die and discuss it. This unique die is part of the exclusive movement system in Dungeon Crusade called the Patrol Route System. This is how the monsters and creatures traverse throughout the dungeon's hallways and corridors with unpredictable movement patterns that provide the player with a sense of a living dungeon. So the Wraith here will move 9 spaces on the orange patrol route. A good way to think of the patrol route die is like the monster's brain, or rather their AI, artificial intelligence. They tell a player where they would like to move to next in the dungeon. Looking more closely at the patrol route die, we can see there are 4 unique monster footprints in 4 different colors on each of the 2 sides of the die. There's orange, green, purple, and blue. Now, looking at the dungeon, we can see the same 4 unique monster footprints in those colors aforementioned on the floor, and they are all networked throughout the dungeon, leading to either a spawn point or a skull pile. Notice how the skeletal grunt ends its turn and is not on a spawn point or skull pile. On its next turn, it will only roll the d6 to generate its movement and roll the raid die. A minion will never roll the patrol route die if it is not on a spawn point or skull pile. However, if on its next turn it makes it to the spawn point or skull pile with movement remaining, it will then roll the patrol route die to pick up a new patrol route and use its remaining movement at that time. Since we are talking about minions, you'll discover that there are two different versions of minions. There are normal minions and elite minions. Elite minions will have a gold star in the upper left-hand corner of its monster card. Elite minions will always have some type of special ability, so always make sure to consult what that special ability is on its turn. Normal minions will have a silver star in the upper left-hand corner of its monster card. Normal minions never have any type of special ability to process. They just have the origin stories I wrote for them and where they come from in the land of Avalon. So closing out the monster phase, a player will continue going through each monster and creature in the monster area and processing each of their turns. You can expect minions to move, possibly convert into a raiding minion, have raiding minions attempt to escape the dungeon, to raid the village, thus raising the terror level by 1, and attack heroes. It is worth mentioning that guardian monsters will never leave the dungeon. Their job is to protect the dungeon and slay any pesky heroes they discover within the depths of the dungeon. One last thing I'd like to point out to you is, in regards to raiding minions, is that they have a little bit of an AI to them upon entering into certain quadrants of the dungeon. Within these certain quadrants, you'll discover that there are 2 bloody arrows painted on the dungeon floor. One arrow will have 1 to 3 printed on it, while the other arrow has 4 to 6 printed on it. When a minion first steps into these types of quadrants, they must immediately stop and roll 1d6. If the result is 3 or lower, the minion will use that arrow to move to the adjacent quadrant. If the result is 4 or higher, the minion will use that arrow to move to the adjacent quadrant. With this simple form of AI, it will have the player unsure of where a minion will move to next in its escape out of the dungeon. After all of the monsters in the monster area have taken their turn, this is the end of the monster phase and the end of the current turn. From there, a new turn will commence starting at the upkeep phase. And there you have it, my fellow Crusaders. We have fully wrapped up the 5 phases that comprise a turn in Dungeon Crusade, and I hope that you enjoyed this. But I hope so far with what we went over in the Spotlight video series, you are getting quite familiar and acclimated to the ebb and flow of the game, and seeing that while the game is quite girthy, it was created and developed with easy to understand game mechanics and fundamentals. In closing, as I mentioned, the game is in full swing for the promotional phase, and the reception for the game has been incredibly nice and very strong. Still, it has been wall-to-wall busy on many fronts, so please forgive my delay getting here with you with the Monster Phase video. The Spotlight video series will be continuing with many more videos for you to enjoy over everything in the game. Also, I have to put together the monthly Dungeon Crusade Kickstarter update for everyone and dispatch it, so everyone knows what is going on with the promotion, the manufacturer finishing up the templates for the mass production of the game, and a few other things. And do remember, the Pledge Manager will be closing at 11:59 p.m. on Monday, April 29th. Thank you again for hanging out with me and all of your interest and time in checking out Dungeon Crusade. I really enjoy creating these videos for you, getting you more acclimated to the game, and seeing how everyone is doing. Okay, all, have a great day, and I'll be talking to you very soon. Bye-bye.